You know, I came into work this morning and I decided I just have to shoot this video. I keep getting these emails and I'm actually getting rather tired of answering them. So what I'm going to do in the future when I get an email like this, I'll be able to just direct the person to this video. They can watch this video as I explain what I have to sit down and type for 5 minutes because people are having problems with their old gasoline V8s trying to get them to run right. Now behind me is a 1983 380SL. These are quite popular now. People are picking these up. They haven't run, they've been in storage. Maybe they come from some inheritance from the family and they want to save them, so they try to get them running. You know, they end up putting the new fuel pump in the FID kit that I offer. Here comes emails. I got the car running, but it quits. It won't stay running, or it runs rough. But most of the time, the problem is it will either not start, or it will start and quit, or it will not accelerate. And what I've been having to tell people now is you're going to have to get a fuel system pressure tester on the engine and do a fuel system pressure test. And they're thinking, well, can I just buy some parts? Well, yeah, you can throw the parts cannon at this, but it gets pretty expensive. And most of the time, the parts cannon will not help these K-Jetronic fuel injected Mercedes engines. Now, this K-Jetronic fuel injection system was used on 1976 to 1985 models, so there's a lot of cars in there. You know, it was on the 6-cylinder and the 123, it was on the W116, the 107, and the early 126s. So if you get one of these old Mercedes gas cars that has K-Jetronic, and I'll explain in a minute how you can tell whether you have K-Jetronic, you need to do a fuel system pressure test as soon as you can get the engine running. And I'm going to take you over to this engine and explain why. This is a 3.8 liter V8 engine with Bosch K-Jetronic fuel injection. And there's two things you can look at and spot this very quickly, whether or not your engine has K-Jetronic. Number one, it has hard lines going to the fuel injectors, not wires, but metal hard lines going to each fuel injector. And number two, it has a unit right over here that looks like this. And this is called the warm-up regulator. Now, if you heard that term, you would think, well, that's like a choke. It's just going to choke the engine and give it extra gas until the engine starts. Well, if that were true, this thing wouldn't be such a big problem as it's become today because of its age. It's quite complex inside. Now, immediately you're going to say, well, Kent, what's this here? That's not a warm-up regulator. Why doesn't your engine have one of these? Well, I changed it. This is an electronic warm-up regulator that's been developed by a company, and it works amazing. It eliminates some of the problems that you have with these old ones. I put this on this 380SL, and it's absolutely amazing. This thing starts with just a turn of the key, runs down, idles perfectly, accelerates good. Now, I don't sell this, but I will reference a company that does make these. I'm very impressed with this unit. I usually don't do this, but you'll find a link in the description below this video that will take you to the company that makes the electronic whir. So we're going to go back to this because most of you will have this one. This should be called the mixture compensator, not the warm-up regulator. Because what this does is this actually controls the mixture of the fuel being delivered through this unit here. And if you know anything about gasoline engines, you have to have a certain ratio fuel to air or the engine won't start. It may not even fire. And that's why sometimes people will squirt starting fluid down in here and say, well, I've tried starting fluid and it won't run. Well, the fuel-air ratio could be so far off because of failure inside this warm-up regulator that the engine's not going to start. It's just so far off that no matter what you do, you're pulling your hair out. Maybe you've changed plugs, wires, cap, rotor, and this poor engine's still not starting. Sometimes you do have problems with this fuel distributor here. But what I'm finding is most of the time on the K-Jetronic engine, it's the warm-up regulator that's the primary problem. How do you know whether or not this is bad? That's where a fuel system pressure tester comes in on these engines. I think it's even more important on a K-Jetronic than even a K-Jetronic. The K-Jetronic engine has some limbo mode features that this engine doesn't have, which will allow you to start the car and to get it to run. But not so with the K-Jet. So if you're having problems getting your old V8 K-Jetronic engine to start, to idle, to run right, to accelerate, you're going to have to do a fuel system pressure test before you spend any money on any parts. Okay, now that you understand it is important to do this test, you're going to find out there aren't very many shops that'll do it for you. They just won't work on these old cars anymore, and if they will, they probably don't know what they're doing. So you're going to have to get a pressure tester. Aha, no problem. I can go online and I can buy a fuel injection pressure tester on Amazon. They're pretty cheap. And look at this. Look at all the goodies you get. You're going to go, wow, this is an amazing buy. Well, guess what? I'm going to show you now why this is not an amazing buy. But Kent, how can you say that? Well, just look at this. It's got to be amazing for the price. You get all these fittings, all these different hoses. Man, what could be better than that? Well, first off, for testing K-Jetronic, you're only going to need about 4 of these fittings, and you're only going to need 1 of these hoses, including the gauge. That's all you're going to need. One of the things that I caution people about when doing these fuel system pressure tests is fuel leaks. You should always have a fire extinguisher handy. You should do this outside because fuel could be squirting out somewhere and it's very dangerous. So I can't stress this enough. The problem with all these that you find online is half of them leak. So how can you say this is amazing when it won't even pass the basic test of not leaking gasoline? Along with discovering a lot of these testers had problems with leaks, I also discovered that a lot of them had gauges that weren't accurate. You know, one time I just decided, hey, let's check and see if these gauges are accurate, because when you talk about doing a pressure test, knowing specifically how much pressure should you have as full pressure and control pressure, if you're off 3 or 4 pounds, what good is doing a fuel system pressure test? So it became obvious that manufacturers weren't testing these products, weren't testing these testers. They weren't pressure testing them, they weren't leak testing them, they weren't testing the gauges. These gauges are very fragile. If you bang them around, there's a real fine gear mechanism back here, kind of like a watch. And if they get damaged, they're not going to give you an accurate reading. So a couple years ago, when I set out to provide my customers with a reliable, tested, and accurate pressure tester, I had a number of challenges I had to deal with. I knew right away when I put one together, I was going to have to do a lot of testing, making sure that the gauges were accurate, making sure there were no leaks anywhere. So this required pressure testing different components of the tester and submerging them in water to make sure there were no leaks. And of course, I chose to use a liquid-filled gauge. This will minimize damage to the gauge and increase accuracy, but you still have to be a little bit careful how you handle this around an engine compartment. Then as far as fittings, every fitting that I get, I have to test. We get some of these in the lathe, we have to cut them back so they actually seal properly. You want this to go down, you want it to go down easily, and when you tighten this down, you want to make sure that that's 100% sealed when you're doing the test on your engine. And in my kit, I provide a special wrench which will allow you to get on these fittings in real tight situations. You can see how thin that wrench is. I also provide a jumper lead so you can jump your fuel pump relay and actually do the test without the engine running. And you can see here, this is really important, I provide a tank so when you do a pressure release after the test, you don't have gasoline spilling all over your engine. So every one of these, we spend about an hour on each unit testing all the fittings, testing for leaks, testing for sealing, and we only ship what you need. You don't need 100 fittings. This is what you need. We explain it. I have a multi-part video series that comes with this, over 2.5 hours long. And I believe the video series will help you do this yourself. You can actually hook this up. It's not rocket science as long as you know how to hook it up properly and how to read pressures and how to diagnose what you're reading. And that's included in my video series, which comes with the tester that I sell on my website. In conclusion, I just want to say, if you own one of these 1976, 1985 K-Jetronic fuel-injected Mercedes-Benzes and you're struggling trying to get it to run right, you basically have one of two choices. Either you can do a fuel system pressure test to diagnose what is going on, or you can continue to throw parts at the problem.